The desert morning stretched wide and silent as Calder Wyatt rode across the flats, his mare moving with a steady, unhurried rhythm. Dust drifted behind him like a thin ghost following every step. Out here, silence wasn't emptiness. It was protection, a reminder he was tracking a stray heifer when he heard it. A sound too soft to be wind, a breath that didn't belong to the open land called a stopped cold. He dismounted, moving toward the cottonwoods lining a shallow wash. Light slipped between the branches in thin gold stripes, and beneath the oldest tree he found her, a young woman, bound, exhausted, barely standing, clothes torn by rough handling, wrists rubbed raw from struggling. Her head hung low, breath shallow, as if she'd been fighting for far too long. Calder's jaw tightened. Whoever left her wanted to scare her, break her, maybe make a message out of her. But she was still alive, and that was enough for him. He stepped closer, voice low, steady. "You're safe now. I've got you." She didn't answer, but when he freed her hands, she leaned into him just enough to show she still had hope left. The desert wind carried a quiet warning. Someone had done this, and someone might return. Calder carried the girl across the last stretch of desert, his steps firm but careful. By the time his small ranch came into view, a lone cabin framed by a weathered barn, the sun had dipped low, turning the sky into deep copper dot inside. He set her gently on the cot. She was conscious, but fragile, eyes drifting like she was halfway between fear and exhaustion. Calder warmed water, dipped a cloth, and cleaned the dust from her hands and face. Every movement was slow, steady, meant to reassure rather than startle. She watched him the whole time, not with trust, but with the alertness of someone who learned that silence keeps you alive. "You're hurt," he said quietly. "Let me help." She didn't respond, but she didn't pull away either. He wrapped her wrists, offered her a cup of water, and set a blanket around her shoulders. The room filled with the soft glow of a lantern, flickering against old wooden walls. Outside, coyotes called in the distance, but inside the cabin, a fragile calm began to settle. "You got a name?" he asked. She blinked once, eyes unreadable. "All right," he murmured, "until you tell me different." "Lena will do." He stepped back to give her space. She held his sleeve for just a second, barely there before letting go. A silent thank you, a silent fear, a silent question of what comes next. Outside, the night deepened, carrying a feeling he couldn't ignore. Someone might be looking for her. The next days moved slowly, like the desert itself was holding its breath. Lena stayed mostly by the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching every shift of light outside. She still hadn't spoken, but she observed everything Calder's footsteps. The way he moved around the kitchen, the sound of the barn door at dusk. Calder kept his distance, giving her room. But he noticed small changes. She ate a little more each day. She stood longer without trembling. And sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, she studied him, curious, cautious, measuring. By the third morning, something broke the routine. A single boot print near the barn. Fresh, newer than his, not hers. Calder knelt, turning serious. A military-style heel. To clean, to belong to a drifter. Too close to ignore. He glanced toward the cabin. Lena sensed it. She stiffened as soon as he entered. "Someone's been here," he said quietly. She didn't answer, but her shoulders tightened in a way that told him she already knew more than she let on. That evening, he stayed on the porch with his rifle near Binot, raised, not aimed, just ready. The sky turned deep blue, coyotes singing far off, wind brushing through dry grass like whispers. Inside, Lena paced in slow circles. Not fear, preparation. Something or someone was coming, and Calder wasn't sure if the threat was after her, or both of them now. By midday the next day, dust rose on the horizon. Calder stepped off the porch, jaw tight. A single rider approached, uniformed, steady, official. Not a drifter, not a friend. The man stopped a few yards away, reins taut. Afternoon light glinted off the brass on his coat. "Looking for someone," he said. Calder didn't move. "Depends who." The officer held out a folded notice. A sketch of a young woman, similar in outline to Lena, but vague enough to deny. "Wanted for questioning," it read. That was all. No details. No accusations. Just an open door for trouble. "Seen anyone like her?" the officer asked. Calder studied the paper only long enough to show respect, then handed it back. "No one but cattle and shadows." The officer lingered, searching Calder's face for cracks. "She might be scared. Might be hiding. We just need to speak with her. I'll send word if I see anything." Calder replied, calm but unyielding. After a long stare, the rider turned and headed back the way he came. When Calder stepped inside, Lena was standing just behind the curtain. She'd heard every word. He removed his hat and set it aside. "They're looking for you," he said gently. But I didn't say a thing. She didn't speak, but the way she watched him changed it slightly. There was caution, yes, but also the beginning of something else, a fragile thread of trust. Outside, the wind fell silent. Inside, the silence felt warmer. The afternoon slipped into a quiet, uneasy evening. Calder stayed on the porch, sharpening his knife out of habit more than need. Each stroke echoed through the stillness, a slow reminder that the peace around them was thinner than it looked. Then he heard its soft steps in the dirt light. Hesitant, human. He looked up. Lena had stepped outside for the first time since he brought her here. The blanket draped over her shoulders moved with a warm breeze, and for a moment she just stood there, as if testing whether the world beyond the threshold still belonged to her. Calder didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched. She walked toward the barn, slow but steady. At a small patch of dust swept clean by wind, she knelt and let the blanket slide to her elbows. With a small stick, she began to draw, focused, deliberate. Curious, Calder approached quietly. In the dirt, she had shaped a bird with wide wings, surrounded by flowing lines. Fire, wind, memory, something symbolic, something sacred. "Was that?" he asked softly. At first, she didn't respond. Then, without looking up, she whispered, "My family sign." The way she said it carried more than explanation. It carried loss, but also identity. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving. She was remembering. Calder knelt beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm listening," he said. Lena's breath wavered, but she kept her eyes on the drawing. And slowly, carefully, she began to speak. The truth was coming, heavy and long awaited. Lena's voice trembled at first, like it hadn't been used in years, but the words found their way out. She spoke of her people, small, peaceful, holding to old traditions and quiet ways of living. They traded, farmed, prayed. They didn't want trouble, but trouble came anyway. A misunderstanding, a blame placed on the wrong people. And then outsiders arrived with fear burning hotter than reason. Her village was scattered, families forced from their land, homes pushed aside. No battles shown, no smoke described, just the weight of losses that had no fairness in them. "I ran," she whispered, hands twisting in her lap. "I hid, but they thought I knew things, thought I was part of something dangerous." She paused, looking up at Calder for the first time with open eyes. "I wasn't. I only wanted to live." Her voice cracked not from fear, but from remembering too much silence. Calder didn't interrupt. He didn't offer empty comfort. He simply stayed there beside her, steady as stone, letting her truth settle in the warm evening air. When her shoulders finally eased, he spoke quietly. "I believe you." The words were simple, but they struck something deep inside her, something she'd kept locked behind instinct and caution. For the first time, she didn't look like someone waiting to run. She looked like someone deciding to stay. The last light of day slipped behind the ridge. Her drawing faded into shadow. but the honesty between them, new, fragile, undeniable, stayed bright. That night, the wind slipped through the rafters with a low whisper, carrying the scent of cooling desert earth. Calder sat by the small fire in the cabin, stirring a pot of beans he wasn't really hungry for. The flame painted soft amber light across the walls, turning the quiet room into something warmer than it had felt in years. Lena stood by the window, arms wrapped loosely around herself, watching the shadows settle outside. But she wasn't hiding anymore. She was thinking. After a long moment, she turned. "You want the rest of it?" she asked. Calder looked up, surprised by the strength in her voice. "Only if you want to give it," he said. She stepped closer, sitting across from him at the table. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes stayed clear. "My father. He was a leader," she began. "Not a war of peace. He taught us how to live with the land, how to share, how to bend before breaking." She paused, gathering breath. "After the trouble started, people blamed us for something we didn't do. Not because they knew, but because it was easier." Calder felt something hit deep in his chest. He knew what it meant to be blamed by the wrong people, the wrong moment. "They questioned me," she continued quietly. "They thought I could answer for everyone, when I couldn't. They left me out there, hoping someone else would find me first." Her voice faded into the crackle of the fire. Calder set the spoon aside and rose slowly, moving around the table. He stopped in front of her, not too close, just enough that she could look up into his eyes without fear. "You deserved better," he said softly. "Everyone does." Something shifted in her expression and unspoken gratitude. A small loosening in her shoulders, a breath she hadn't let herself take until now. For the first time, the silence between them felt like connection, not distance. Morning arrived, soft and pale, the sky washed in muted gold. The world felt gentler than the night before, as if the desert itself understood something had changed inside that small cabin. Lena stood outside, watching the horizon with a quiet steadiness. Calder joined her, boots crunching lightly in the sand. There was no fear in her posture, no, only calm resolve. "We can't stay here," he said. She nodded. She already knew. "There'll be questions, more riders, more pressure." Another nod. But this time, there was no panic in her eyes. "Where would we go?" she asked softly. Calder looked toward the distant mountains, their silhouettes rising like old guardians against the morning sky. South, quiet land, fewer men, more peace. He hesitated. "If you want that." A long silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncertainty. It was choice. She stepped closer, eyes lifting to meet his. "Where you go, I go to." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything she had survived in, everything she hoped to build. Calder exhaled, the tension in his shoulders finally easing. "All right then," he murmured. "We start tonight." As the sun climbed, he saddled the horses, packed what little they owned, and took one last look at the ranch lawn, weathered, and now part of something finished. Lena stood beside him, not as someone needing rescue, but as someone choosing a new life on her own terms. When they rode out under the wide sky, the desert wind felt different, lighter, most blessing them as they crossed into a future built on quiet courage and the fragile, growing bond between them. Behind them, the past settled into the dust. Ahead, the horizon opened, a reminder that sometimes survival becomes strength, and strength becomes love.